New York City, so enjoy it while it lasts. Thursday is upon us. I always tell people that tomorrow is a Thursday, but that Thursday is unlike any other Thursday that has ever happened before. The day after Thursday is going to be, in all likelihood, unless there are some very strange circumstances, the day after Thursday is going to be Friday. But the Friday that comes after Thursday will be unlike any Friday that has ever existed before in the history of the universe. The world is constantly in motion. A does not equal A. You never step into the same river twice. Welcome, everybody. So glad to be with you here. I've got some unnamed water beverage. I'm a tired fellow. I've got work in the morning tomorrow, so hopefully I won't be on here for too long tonight. But, I mean, that's up to you, really. It's up to how many super chats you all put in. If you put in a lot of super chats, I keep going. I owe it to you. That's the way it works. You give me a super chat, I give you an answer. So if you want to make me absolutely miserable, by all means, send in as many super chats as you possibly can, and I'll be on here until the break of dawn. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But anyway, fun times, folks. Anyway, I'm so glad to be here with all of you. The way we do it is that we have my opening remarks, and then from there, we do the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. I call you out as I see you. Then from there, I answer your super chat questions, and then we're done. Then the show is over. That's how it works. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. You always want to be informed what's happening. Post this on Twitter, post this on Reddit. Good times, folks. Let's jump right into my opening remarks. Folks, there are two capitalisms in the world today, and there are two socialisms in the world today. I support one of those capitalisms, and I support one of those socialisms. And I oppose one of those capitalisms, and I oppose one of those socialisms. Folks, the capitalism that I am opposed to is capitalism in its monopoly stage, imperialism, the system where profits come before people. Favorite history book? Books and 26 plus 6 equals 1. Irish slogan. What's the left's obsession with Jordan Peterson? Okay, Jordan Peterson. Very good. Alrighty. The capitalism that dominates the world. The rule of the world by Western banks and corporations, huge multinationals dominating the globe, driving wages and living standards down, keeping countries in chronic poverty and underdevelopment. The IMF and the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, Exxon Mobil, BP, Chevron, and Shell Oil, General Electric, Chase Bank, the huge multinational corporations that dominate the globe and keep countries in chronic poverty. Most misunderstood in Marxism. Neoliberalism. A strategy. Just writing them down, folks. I'll get to them in the second half of the show. The capitalism that dominates the world, where Nigeria can be the top oil exporting country in Africa, and yet have malnutrition left and right. No country in Africa is producing as much oil wealth as Nigeria is, yet the people there are chronically poor. Talk about Haiti. Haiti has been dominated by Western banks and corporations, neoliberalism. The people there are poor and hungry. right? And you can talk about the once prosperous communities across the United States of America. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. That small town used to have factories where people got paid decent wages to do work. There was a jelly factory, there was a dairy plant, there were facilities that worked with companies that made parts of machines that made auto parts, and a lot of different factories. And there were a lot of people who worked in those factories and had good paying jobs. Not anymore. You go throughout the United States of America, you find crumbling roads, crumbling infrastructure. You find a system of prisons for profit. You find war for profit, right? This global system where a small group of international bankers and corporations, big Western monopolies, dominate the globe and grind countries across the planet into poverty. That is the capitalism that I oppose. And it is definitely capitalism. People say, well, it's not real capitalism, Caleb. That's crony capitalism. Folks, all capitalism is crony capitalism. Every capitalist society in history has seen the rich and powerful people rig the political system in their favor. When a small group of people dominate society, they control the banks, factories, and major industries, they tend to rig the political system in their favor. Capitalism leads to the concentration of wealth into the hands of the few, and those few are going to rig the political system. So this distinction, oh, it's not capitalism, it's crony capitalism, is nonsense. All capitalism is crony capitalism. Finance, capital, natural development. All capitalism is crony capitalism, deindustrializing agriculture. Culture under socialism. Wow, you guys are rolling them out tonight. That's okay. Thoughts on small and local solutions to capitalism. Let's do capitalism. Decentralization. The system that grinds countries into poverty, that has left Honduras and Guatemala as a mess of drug cartels and foreign domination, the system that enforces its will with war and sanctions, that saw that Iraq was an independent country, a Ba'athist Arab socialist country. So it lied, it used lying media to tell us they had weapons of mass destruction and then blew the country to bits. The system that saw that Libya was the most prosperous country on the African continent, an Islamic socialist society that was raising people out of poverty. So it lied and it said the people were rebelling and it was a revolution and blew that country to bits and destroyed it. The system that tells us Iran is our enemy, the system that tells us Russia is our enemy, the system that tells us Venezuela is our enemy, the system that tells us China is our enemy. Well, our enemy is on Wall Street, and our enemy is imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage. The drive of big corporations to make the world poorer and poorer and poorer in order to make themselves richer. The system that doesn't see human beings as people, but sees them rather as a financial calculation. The system that is constantly trying to eliminate workers from the assembly line, leaves millions outcast and starving. The system that drives migrants to flock over the U.S. border because they don't have a decent life in their home country. The system that drives working class people from places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan to flee to California or New York or Washington, D.C. just to have a decent life. They're unable to stay and live in the community they grew up in because it's been economically devastated. The system that says, fine, we can't make money from employing people in factories. We'll push doctors to overprescribe opioids, right? Get people hooked on opioids, right? Destroy people's lives with addiction. That system that system that sees interactions between people and turns them into commodities, that system, that system that grinds the world into poverty, that system that enforces its will with war, right, with bombing countries and destroying them, that system that views war and death, sending working class people to Afghanistan or Iraq, views that as a way to make profits, that system, that capitalism, that is the capitalism that I oppose. That is a capitalism that I vehemently oppose. Capitalism in its monopoly stage, the global system of monopoly capitalism. And this is definitely capitalism. It is the rule of the world by profits, and I oppose that capitalism. But there is another capitalism in the world that I do not oppose. And there are many examples of this capitalism that I don't really oppose. You may not really call it capitalism, but that's my point. Go to Nicaragua, right? It's a socialist country. I did a great interview with Ramiro about his recent trip there. Nicaragua is a socialist country. The commanding heights of the economy, the banks, the major centers of economic power are under public control. Amazon Union vote. Amazon Union vote. But all across Nicaragua, there are Nicaraguans who get loaned money by the Nicaraguan government to start their own businesses. There are micro entrepreneurs who make their own hats, make their own baskets, make their own crafts. There are small farmers who get loaned by the government to expand their agricultural production. And yes, those are profit-seeking institutions. Those are privately owned means of production. The owners of those basket-weaving stands in Nicaragua, those private farms in Nicaragua, they may get a subsidy from the government. They certainly have been cultivated and are directed more or less by a socialist government, but they're for-profit institutions. They are working to maximize their own profits. It is their little store. It is their little craft. It is capitalism. Right? Huawei Technologies, that's capitalism. That is a for-profit corporation. Now, it practices profit sharing and has been widely praised for its profit sharing practices. But Huawei, while it is profit sharing, it is seeking to make profits. 6 Nations. Iroquois. It is certainly a for-profit institution. Right? Go to Vietnam. Right? Go to Cuba. Right? In Cuba, you've got little restaurants that are opened up. You've got hotels that are opened up. And these are profit-seeking institutions. These are technically capitalist entities. But they function as part of an overall socialist society. Huawei, yes, wants to make its own profits, but it gets a subsidy from a socialist government. It's told what to do by a socialist government. So, yeah, I mean, Huawei is technically a for-profit capitalist institution, but it's a kind of capitalism I don't oppose. Right? It's a kind of capitalism created for the benefit of a socialist society. Right? In Vietnam, in China, in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, they need some level of capitalism to help the society flourish and move towards socialism. They've determined that this is necessary. Go to Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela. Venezuela, the whole economy is centered around the government control of oil. And there's a beautiful building in Venezuela, which I've had the honor of visiting, called the Center for African Knowledge. And it is a whole government building. It's a museum, but also a government, facility for taking care of the needs of Afro-Venezuelans. A number of Venezuelans have African heritage, African blood. So there's this whole building that has been built, the Center for African Knowledge. And it's a museum, and they have classes and seminars there, and it specifically deals with the needs of Afro-Venezuelans. But all throughout the building, there are stores, right? There are clothing stores. There are toy stores in the building owned by Afro-Venezuelans. And part of the Center for African Knowledge is subsidizing all of these Afro-Venezuelans to open their own stores, right? To sell their own products, and people from African countries visit Venezuela all the time, and they go to the Center for African Knowledge, and they go and attend the seminars and classes there. They look at the museum on Venezuela's African roots, and they go and shop at those stores. And all those stores in the Center for African Knowledge are stores, they're capitalists. That's capitalism that I support. It's a totally different capitalism from ExxonMobil and General Electric and BP and Shell and Chevron. It's capitalism, if you can call it that, but it's capitalism that is controlled. It's capitalism that is utilized to serve socialism. It is capitalism giving low-income working class people an opportunity to go into business, to be their own boss, but to do so in a way that is coordinated with an overall socialist society. You see that in China with Huawei, and you see that in Vietnam, you see that in Nicaragua, you see that in Venezuela, you see it in Cuba, right? Technically, you could call these things capitalism, but it's capitalism serving socialism. It's capitalism as part of a socialist strategy for raising people out of poverty. Capitalism is a system of profits in command. Socialism is a society where the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are forced to work in the interests of public good and not profits. Socialism is getting rid of the anarchy of production. It's getting rid of profits in command. And part of socialism is creating what you could call capitalist institutions. Now, while I oppose the free market, neoliberal, imperialist Western capitalism, I don't oppose the small business owners, the strategic markets, the market-oriented socialist economy of Vietnam, the socialist-oriented market economy, socialism with Chinese characteristics. I don't oppose these things. Right? Talk about Iran and their system of what they refer to as not capitalism but Islam. Right, where in Iran you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as the largest economic entity in the country, government-controlled oil, government-controlled power plants, government-controlled steel manufacturing. But they have small business owners in Iran as well. And Iranians being able to open their own businesses and flourish as part of the vision of building a non-capitalist society based on Islamic teachings, I'm not opposed to that. Right? I'm not opposed to small business owners in Syria who are supporters of Ba'athist Arab socialism and open their businesses, in coordination with Syria's overall state central plan. There is a capitalism that I oppose, and there is a capitalism, I put that in quotes, there is a profit-oriented sector, there is a market that I don't oppose. So though, I just laid out the capitalism that I oppose, the global free market, imperialist capitalism, and the capitalism, if you want to call it that, the market sector, the profit-oriented institutions that I support. And now to the socialism. What is the socialism that I support? Well, the socialism that I support is the socialism that has raised 800 million people in China out of poverty. In China, where they have government-controlled banks and 5-year economic plans and state-controlled industries, the government has forced the economy to work in the interest of the people. And 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. And the world's biggest hydroelectrical power plant has been constructed. And the world's largest telecommunications manufacturer, Huawei, has been constructed. And society is forced to work in the interests, not of profits, but in the interests of society overall. 2015, the Chinese stock market crashed. And all over American media, they said, it's the end of growth in China. It's coming to an end. Well, wait a week. Chinese stock market shot right back up. And why was that? Because the Chinese Communist Party called up and banned all short selling and told all the profit institutions and all the state-run industries what to do. And immediately, the stock market that had gone down by 30 points shot right back up. Why? Because the Chinese Communist Party told them to. Because profits and the chaos of the market are not in command. I support that socialism. Cuba, right? Cuba, an impoverished island 90 miles south of the United States, where, where there was chronic underdevelopment and poverty. Fidel Castro came into office, and he eliminated illiteracy, wiped out illiteracy in the country, built electrical power plants, built an educational system and a healthcare system that is admired by countries all over the world. It's got roughly the same infant mortality rate and life expectancy as some of the richest Western countries like Britain and the United States. Well, that's socialism. That's a society where the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are organized to serve public good and not profits. And through that, growth is carried out and people rise from poverty. And that is a socialism that I support. Diamond pipeline. And does the communist society come into being? All right. Okay. Right. In Venezuela, they have a socialist society, and they have done a huge amount to help the people there. I went to a neighborhood in central Caracas where every home had been built by an interest-free loan provided by the Venezuelan government. And before that, people lived in shacks without electricity, without running water. Now they lived in beautiful homes. They would never have gotten that if it wasn't for the Venezuelan socialist society, if it wasn't for the oil wealth and the economy being recentered around state-controlled oil and that oil being used for economic development. That's a socialism I support, right? They wiped out illiteracy in Venezuela. Beautiful, right? They built beautiful facilities, where young people engage in art and community-controlled radio stations and eliminated poverty. They built all kinds of new universities in Venezuela. It's amazing what they've done. And yes, the food crisis created by Western capitalism and the sanctions, as they squeeze Venezuela and try to ruin it, that exists for sure. And, and that's not the fault of Venezuela. It's the fault of the Western capitalists that are trying to isolate and destroy Venezuela. But it hasn't worked. In fact, it's made the Venezuelan people more steadfast in their anti-imperialism. Right? Bolivia, Evo Morales and his socialist system. They had the highest rate of growth in all of South America. Roads paved all over the country, illiteracy wiped out. They started working with Chinese state-controlled corporations to start extracting their mineral resources. The economic advisor to Evo Morales was a very, very brilliant Marxist economist who had studied in China and had studied in the former Soviet Union and had developed very specific economic theories about how to raise living standards while transitioning toward a more socialist and centrally planned economy. And it had tremendous results in Bolivia. Just tremendous results for the economy. I support that socialism. Right? Right? Socialism exists in the world today. Libertarian growth. It certainly exists in the world today. Absolutely exists in the world today. No question about it. There is definitely socialism in the world today. But sometimes that socialism is a little bit conservative. Why? Because that socialism is about presenting stability. Working class people's lives are made chaotic by capitalism. But the strength of socialism is that the state controls the means of production. And so you don't have the chaos and insecurity that comes with a capitalist market, with constant unemployment, with the stock market zigging and zagging and going up and down, market turbulence. You have a planned economy. And yes, in some cases, many cases, the Chinese government, the Venezuelan government, the Cuban government, Nicaraguan government, the Vietnamese government, they present themselves in a conservative way. They say we're preserving a good society. We're offering stability. We're making people proud of their homeland and of their country. We're teaching young people good moral values. Right? In China, the socialist system right now is emphasizing a revival of Confucianism and how the Confucian principles that built Chinese civilization thousands of years ago can be aligned with communist values and Marxism and Mao Zedong thought and Deng Xiaoping theory. Right? Confucianism is very conservative, but Marxism is very liberatory and left-wing, and they've found a way to combine them. Right? In Venezuela, they are Bolivarians, after Simón Bolívar, the George Washington of South America. And the young people, I've seen them. They get out in their berets, and they salute like this. It's beautiful. When I went to a commune in central Caracas, a colectivo, Comuna Pinal, beehive commune, there was a young woman there who was head of security, 19 years old, wearing army pants. She had been a homeless child. And she'd been adopted by a priest, and that priest was a communist. And that priest was a big supporter of Hugo Chavez, and he had an orphanage for homeless children. And, in that orphanage, she grew up, and every day they would listen to Hugo Chavez on the TV. She told us, she said, "I am a Christian," she said, "and I believe Jesus Christ brought me to this earth for one purpose," she said, "and that's to die for Hugo Chavez. I will die for Bolivarian socialism," she said to us. The 19-year-old girl, army pants, she was buff. I've interviewed her. It's on the YouTube channel. She said, "I believe I was brought to this earth to die for Hugo Chavez." That's conservative. That's not liberal, right? WS, AOC. That's not liberal, right? That's not everyone doing their own thing, everything being a matter of opinion, two sides to every story. That's conservative, right? When I was in Ecuador under Evo Morales, I remember in the morning going out in the Bicentennial Park with the young people, and there'd be crowds of young people, hundreds of young people, and all of us would be doing karate in the exact same motions, doing karate, punching and kicking. They do this with the young people. They teach them patriotism. They have a special kind of karate and martial arts that's designed by the Ecuadorian socialist leaders. And in the low-income neighborhoods, in the working class areas of Ecuador, they teach these young people how to do karate, how to defend themselves. They wear uniforms. They're disciplined. That's conservative. I support this socialism. Right? This is the socialism of William Z. Foster. This is the socialism that Gus Hall was all about. This is the socialism the Black Panthers were fighting for. If you look at the Black Panthers, they were wearing uniforms. They had a free breakfast program. They had education classes. They had the little kids wearing their berets and being proud of who they are. Dalai Lama. All right? They absolutely, the real socialism in this world can sometimes be a little bit conservative, can sometimes be a little bit disciplined, can sometimes be a little bit, dare I say, authoritarian. It's about giving people a purpose, giving people something to live for, mobilizing the population to go and build and construct. And I am for that socialism. Whether it's in China, whether it's in Vietnam, whether it's in Nicaragua or Venezuela or Bolivia, whether it's in Syria, whether it's what Gaddafi did in Libya before the overthrow, whether it's what went on in the former Soviet Union. I am for the socialism that exists that is about growth. It's about raising people up. It's about building and constructing. It's about giving people a community to be part of. That's the socialism that I support. But there's another socialism, as I'm sure you all are aware, that I don't support. And it's not really socialism, but it calls itself socialism. They're a leader that millions of Americans would die for. Calls itself socialism. That's the socialism of Antifa. It's the socialism of, bread tube. It's the socialism of pessimism. It's the socialism of little irrelevant Trotskyite groups yelling at each other and saying they're the real revolutionary. No, I'm the real revolutionary. No, I'm the real revolutionary. Not interested in that socialism. Paul Robeson. Not interested in that socialism. There's a socialism that's about destruction. It sees the American people as the enemy, sees the American people as a bunch of worthless, racist rednecks who deserve to be poor because they're benefiting from imperialism. A socialism that thinks taking care of yourself and dressing nicely is fascist and Nazi. A socialism that celebrates ugliness. A socialism that celebrates drug use and death. A socialism that believes growth is bad. All right, write it down, libertarian failure. Socialism that thinks we need to drive down the human population because there's too many people in the world. We need to reduce consumption. A socialism that fantasizes about going back to hunter-gatherer civilization, about rolling back the wheels of human history by 8,000 years, going back to living in caves because then we can be one with Mother Nature. A socialism that doesn't fantasize about the beautiful society we could build without capitalism, but instead focuses on the sexualized, climactic pleasure of destroying the world. A socialism that's a lot like Wagner's opera Götterdämmerung. Right? Have you ever seen Götterdämmerung? Classic work of opera. The end of Götterdämmerung. Defend Venezuela. Götterdämmerung, you have Brunhild, who's the heroine, and her husband, her lover, the hero, is killed ruthlessly. He's stabbed in the back with a spear, and she's hurt by it, so she takes a torch and she lights herself on fire, and she lights the entire world on fire, and the stage goes up in flames, and the whole world catches on fire, right? And the flames go up to the world, and soon all that's left is the Rhine River, right? That's how the Wagner opera Götterdämmerung, the ring cycle, the climax of the ring cycle, ends. And it's fun to listen to. It's fun music. But is that desirable? Do we really want humanity to end in one big explosion? Are we fantasizing about destroying the world? Or are we fantasizing about building a whole new world where working people come to power? There is a pessimistic, synthetic, destructive left. Group of people that think socialism is about stopping growth. Capitalism is bad because people build stuff, and we got to stop building things. That's not me. That is a socialism that I oppose. Socialism that says that if you support China, you support Venezuela, you support Cuba, you're a Nazbol, you're fascist. A socialism that would equate the Soviet people who liberated Germany and tore down the walls of Auschwitz, would equate them with the very people they fought against. A socialism that says that the communists who fought in Spain against Franco, because they were Stalinists, because they admired the Soviet Union, they were just as bad as the Franco-fascists that they fought. A socialism that would say that Paul Robeson and Henry Winston and the leaders of the African-American civil rights movement who admired the Soviet Union and praised Stalin, that because they praised Stalin, why, they're just the same as the Ku Klux Klan. They're the same as the Nazi Party, right? The tankies are just as bad as Nazis, right? A socialism that says there is no hope. A socialism that is sarcastic. A socialism that gets triggered and angry at anyone who actually says we could get things done. A socialism that only glorifies tearing things down. It's not really socialism, but that is a socialism, a synthetic leftism, a cultural poison that I oppose. So that's really how I wanted to give my opening remarks tonight. I told you about the capitalism that I oppose and the capitalism that I support. I told you about the socialism that I support and the socialism that I oppose. I am a city builder, and I want you to be a city builder. Look, I believe that each and every one of you watching this has the potential to become a great revolutionary. A great revolutionary. Drug dealers. I believe you all have the potential to become a great revolutionary. But doing that is not just a battle with the world around you. It's a battle within your soul. We all have a pessimistic, destructive side that holds us back, tells us we're not good enough. I know so many people, they get excited about something they're going to do, something they're going to build and they're going to achieve. And then they have this voice in the back of their head that says, you're a failure. You're going to look stupid. You're never accomplished anything. And they hear that voice, that dark, pessimistic voice in their mind. And it demobilizes them, prevents them from going out and doing what they could do. They have this dark, sinister, pessimistic voice in the back of their mind. It's been somehow inserted there that demobilizes them, that stops them from going, that tells them they're not good enough, that destroys their confidence. And what is that voice? For some people, that voice is perhaps the voice of an abusive parent or an abusive older brother or sister or an abusive teacher that tore them down and humiliated them. In some cases, that voice may just be memories of times that they did things and it didn't work out so well. It holds you back. That voice that says you cannot accomplish anything. That voice that prevents you from getting your strength and your energy together and going out and doing what's right and going out and doing what needs to be done and going out and making a great accomplishment for socialism and for the revolution. That voice that says there is no hope and it's better to just sit at home and make fun of people on YouTube. That voice needs to be eradicated. I want that voice to get out of your head. I want that voice gone. I want to perform surgery on you, figuratively, of course. I want to remove that voice from your mind. I want to make you confident. I want to make you proud of who you are. I want to unleash you to stand up and make a great contribution to the society you live in. Tear down the old and build the new. Thank you, Dylan. I'm glad you appreciate what I do. That's what I'm about. I want to give you the ability to be the best that you can be and make the world a better place. By not just waging a battle against the forces of evil in our society, but waging a battle of those destructive forces of evil within yourself. Right? And I'll be real, as much as I'm on here on YouTube, I'm talking into my iPhone, and you're probably all listening to me on iPhones or iPads or computers. A lot of that poison comes from social media. A lot of that poison comes from social media. It does, right? Social media is toxic. It is loaded with pessimism, loaded with hopelessness, loaded with sarcasm, with cynicism, with shaming, with cyberbullying, with destroying people's confidence. Social media is toxic. Sometimes, in order to get your strength together and do what needs to be done, you need to just turn the TV off, turn the YouTube off, turn Twitter, Facebook, turn it all off, and focus on loving yourself and being proud of yourself and building a connection with the people who actually matter, with the people in your community, the people you work with. There is no real substitute for a real connection. The people on social media, sure, it's a connection. You can connect to people on social media to some degree or other. But real life is where you find love. The internet can be a world of illusion. And I'm here to try and get you get you to find the strength within yourself to go out and be a great socialist, a great revolutionary, someone who loves their community, loves their country, loves their class so much that they are willing to go out and dismantle imperialism and create a rational, healthy society. Che Guevara, he said that revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love. Great feelings of love. Now, is that great feelings of hate? No. Great feelings of orgasmic destruction? No. Great feelings of rage? No. Great feelings of self-harm and self-hate? No. Great feelings of jealousy? No. Great feelings of resentment? No. Revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love. And love is not something you can experience on your own. Love is something that involves connections with other people. You know, I tell people, I've told this story before, and then I'll wrap up my opening remarks. When I was a teenager, when I was 15 years old, I had the opportunity to go up to Cleveland to go to a communist bookstore. And it was a huge opportunity. They did not have communist bookstores in my little tiny town in the middle of the cornfields in Ohio. They did in Cleveland. So I got to go to this communist bookstore. It was a great opportunity. My parents went somewhere else, and I was able to go to this communist bookstore. I was so excited to be there. And I didn't have very much confidence. When I would talk about communism at school, around the household, my parents, my sibling, they told me to shut up. They told me, you're embarrassing the family. Everyone thinks you're stupid. Everyone knows communism doesn't work, Caleb. You're embarrassing the family. But, you know, I was told to shut up, never talk about communism, right? You know, believing in communism was this weird thing. You know, that was Gavin Newsom saw it. And so I went to this bookstore. I'm 15 years old. I'm in the bookstore, and they had some speeches or something, right? A little presentation or a book discussion or something. So the discussion's over. I've got a couple more hours to be in the bookstore. So, the back of the bookstore, someone walks over to me with a stack of newspapers, like, you know, thick stack of newspapers, shoves it into my hand. All right, Caleb, we're going to go sell the paper. And I was like, wait, what? You know, we're going to go sell the paper. And I said, I didn't even understand what they were saying. Didn't even understand what they were saying. We're going to go sell the paper. And they explained to me that I was going to go out with them onto the streets of Coventry in Cleveland Heights, Coventry neighborhood. I was going to have a stack of communist newspapers in my hand, and I was going to walk up to people I had never met before and try to get them to pay me money for a newspaper. And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. You want me to go out and talk to people I've never met before about communism and try to get them to give me $1 in exchange for a communist newspaper? You have to be out of your mind. I can't do that. And they said, no, we do it all the time. You'll be fine. And I couldn't believe this. Couldn't believe it. So I went out and I thought, oh my God, I can't say communist. So I was holding it up. People would go by. Are you interested in socialism? You know, got some info on socialism here. It didn't work. Somebody said, you can't just stand there and do that. You got to walk up to them. Don't say socialist, say communist. It'll get their attention. I will always remember the very first newspaper I sold was to a couple. The guy was wearing an Ohio State t-shirt for Ohio State University. He was kind of a chubby guy, maybe in early 30s. And he had his wife there, a blonde-haired woman was walking with him. Walked up to him. I said, sir, would you like to buy a communist newspaper? And the guy's like, whoa, communist newspaper? And he looked down at me, and I'll never forget this. I was wearing my Letterman's jacket. because I was an athlete. I played soccer in high school. And so he saw that my Letterman's jacket that I was wearing, which was red for my little town, that was our football team. My little town was called Orville, and so our symbol was an O. Socialism failed to spread a... nukes. And so he said, you know what? He said he saw the O on my jacket for Orville, the little town I was from, my Letterman's jacket. I tried to sell him this newspaper as a 15-year-old. And the guy said, well, he said, I'm not really into communism, but you go to Oberlin College, so I'll buy your paper. Pulled $1 out of his wallet, handed me $1. I handed him a communist newspaper, and I thought, oh my God, I have just done the impossible. I got somebody to pay cash money for a communist newspaper. And you know what, folks? That is a kind of capitalism I support. That is an example of the kind of capitalism I support. People going out on the street and selling communist newspapers, cash transactions. There's another capitalism I support. But yes, I got this guy who thought I went to Oberlin College, but you go to Oberlin, handed me $1, I handed him a newspaper, and I had done the impossible. But you know, that was the first communist newspaper I ever sold. And it was hard for me to get the words out of my mouth. Because of all that shame I had in the back of my voice, my head, people are going to think you're crazy. Communist. But I pushed that shame aside and I sold that newspaper. And you know what? The next newspaper I sold was 10 times easier. And the next newspaper I sold was 20 times easier than that one. And pretty soon, well, by the time I was a college student, I had the highest newspaper sales numbers of any of the activists I was hanging out in Cleveland. They would beg me practically. To go out and sell newspapers with them. I mean, I'd have class, and I remember they would call me, can you go sell the paper today? And I'd say, I've got class. And they would say things like, oh, well, tell the Iraqi children who got blown up that you have the answer, but you can't. I mean, these people were desperate to have me sell papers, right? Kind of the guilt tripping and all of that. And, that particular communist group wasn't right for me. It wasn't a good group, but they did teach me how to sell papers, and I am internally indebted to them for that, that they taught me to sell papers. Socialist government, police force. It was a great thing. And communism very much brought me out of my shell. I don't think I would be here right now talking to you all if it had not been for communism. If it had not been for Marxism. If I had not been given a reason to be, a reason to live, right, in this pessimistic society. Right? You ask people, what are you going to do? You ask kids, what are you going to do when you grow up? I'm going to make a lot of money. Oh, really? Good luck with that in this economy. Yeah, you're going to make a lot of money. What are you going to do when you grow up? I don't know, play video games, right? I mean, so very few people have anything to live for in this society, right? Very few people. But I had communism. And the communists pushed me to sell papers, to go out on the street, to engage with people, to learn that I had the ability to talk, to speak, right? I am definitely a good talker. I'm on here quite a bit. I have the gift of gab, as people say. Communism has been very, very good to me. Very, very good to me. And communism can be good for you, right? Obviously, it's going to be good for all of us as we move toward a stateless, classless world of vast material abundance, but it can be good for you in the short term as well. Can give you a community to be part of, can give you a cause to fight for. It can give you something to believe in this world of shallowness and lies. And if you are able to become involved with building socialism, I think it will improve your life. I think it will make your life better. And that's what I want to see you do. And I don't care what group you're in. I'm done with the group thing. I don't care if you're in the SWP or the ISO or the QWH or the XYZ. I don't care if you're in the 12th International or the 27th International or the 32nd League of the 25th Trotskyite Bolshevik Party or the 10th Committee of the... I don't care. I'm done with that. I'm not in any party. I am involved with an educational think tank, the Center for Political Innovation. I don't care what group you're in. I don't care which picture you have hanging on your wall, Mao, Rosa Luxemburg, Enver Hoxha, I don't care. Don't care. Daniel de Leon, I don't care. I am involved in a socialist education project. We need to get to the masses with socialism, because only socialism will save America. We need to get out of the movement, out of that pessimistic, destructive, cynical movement, and to the masses. Average Americans need to understand that the reason their jobs are going away, their wages are dropping, the reason that their relatives are dying of opioids or in prison, the reason that their relatives are being sent to die in Iraq and Afghanistan, is because of capitalism and imperialism. It's not because of lizard people or reptile people. It's not because of Jews or immigrants or Muslims. It's because of capitalism. And what we need is a government of action to fight for working families. A government of action to fight for working families. A government of action to give Americans something to be proud of. A government of action to dismantle imperialism. A government of action to refound this country that was established on slavery and racism, to refound it on new values of brotherhood and compassion. Means production. A government of action to make people stronger and prouder of who they are, to bring people together, to mobilize people to build, to tear down the old unjust society, start moving toward a whole new world. A government of action that will team up with China, team up with Russia, build intercontinental high-speed railway, build, joint international efforts around fusion energy, relaunch the space program and start extracting resources from Mars and from asteroids and from other planets. A government of action to eradicate poverty, not just in America, not just in this hemisphere, but all over the planet. To get to a society where war and terrorism and drug addiction are eliminated. They're things people read about in history books and say, my God, I can't believe they let this stuff happen. I can't believe it. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families, to fight against the big monopolies and bankers, to mobilize the working class, to build international friendship and cooperation, peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. I liked that. The Communist Party in the 1950s said they were for peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. Peace, because war should be avoided at all costs. Democracy, because having a small group of billionaires and bankers run society isn't democratic. The people should rule. We should have a government for the people, not for the ultra-rich. Equality, get rid of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, discrimination of all kinds. Equality. Peace, jobs, democracy, and jobs. Full employment. Let the labor of every person be utilized to build a whole new society. Peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. It's a great slogan. But only socialism can create peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. Only socialism is the road to peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. Libertarianism, fascism, anarcho-Bidenism, these things aren't going to give you peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a new constructive socialism to raise people up and bring people together and dismantle imperialism. That's what we need. And I will conclude my opening remarks. I thought they were going to be short, but they're about as long as they always are. I'm going to conclude my opening remarks for tonight by reciting a piece of poetry that I was once recited by an old communist. An old communist once recited this piece of poetry to me. And I have determined to live my life according to it. Older guy from Michigan, who became a communist in the 70s, an LGBT rights activist. This is the poem he recited to me when I was in college, and I memorized it. I've recited it on here before. I certainly did not write it, not my own writing. It's all over the internet, attributed to different people. Who knows who really wrote it? Some people say it might even be Masonic. I don't care. I'm not a Mason. The poem goes like this. In a busy street, in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam, and a sidewall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, like those you might hire if you wanted to build? The foreman just smiled and said, no, indeed. Unskilled labor is all that I need, for I could easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do. So I thought to myself, as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I the type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? Don't know who wrote that poem. Don't know who wrote it, but that is how one should live their life. That is my attitude. I am a constructive socialist. Be a city builder, not a vandal. Be part of the constructive socialist movement to build a whole new world. That is my message for you tonight. And now, let's have our roll call. Names and locations, because we've got a lot of super chats to get through. But keep them rolling in, folks. I'm here for you. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Arturo in Alaska. B in Ohio. Greetings from Fort Lauderdale. Fairhope, Alabama. David in China. Montreal. Chaya. JT24, Mississippi. Solidarity from Hawaii. Cleveland. Pirate Alex. Quebec. The Woodlands of Texas, Tony in Oregon, Danny from Eureka, Illinois, Springfield, Missouri, Char Darling, good friend of the program in Nassau County, Brazil, John in Houston, Detroit, Michigan, Clydebank, Space Coast, Florida, Beloved Couch, Vallejo, California, Troy in Kansas City, Missouri, Heathrow, Wisconsin, Chile, Branson, Missouri, India, greetings, Kolkata, Oakland, California, Azores Islands, Cincinnati, Ohio, Arizona, Ramiro, good friend of the show out in East LA, Sam in Washington State, welcome Sam, Calgary, Houston, Texas, Chicago, Buffalo, New York, Jim, Pomona, California, John in Houston, Martin in Ulster, San Diego, Iceland, Sandy's house, Nazare in California, Longview, Washington, Southern California, SoCal, so red, right? Rosia, West Palm Beach, Indonesia, Glasgow, Scotland, West Palm Beach, Kieran from San Diego, welcome Kieran, Northern Lower Michigan, Arabia, Biff Rose, I'm a communist sympathizer from the 70s. Check it out on YouTube. West Palm Beach, Tasmania. Phoenix, Arizona. Arthur Porter, good friend of the show. Great opening remarks, says Robert Webb. Well, thank you, Robert. Seattle, West Palm Beach. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox, good friend of the show. West Palm Beach. The wilds of West Virginia. Mannheim, Germany. Philadelphia, Bosnia. Minneapolis, David from Michigan, Frank in Rhode Island. Very, very good, Frank. Anybody else? Names and locations. Greece. We got some Greek comrades in the house. Sydney, Australia is in the house. Welcome, Sydney, Australia. Nate is from Sydney, Australia, and he is absolutely welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations. Kendall from San Diego. Welcome, Kendall. Welcome, Kendall from San Diego. Naples, Florida, the Netherlands. I don't know how to pronounce the name of your city in Arizona. Never back down. says Nicholas Lynch. That's right. You too. You never back down. Stand up. Stay strong. Stay strong. All right, folks. Oh, boy. All right. I am going to nail out these history books, or these super chats. First super chat is on the question of favorite history books. So there's a lot of very good history books. I like, obviously, William Z. Foster. In the 1950s, he wrote 5 different history books. The History of the Three Internationals, which is one of my favorite books of all time. The History of the Communist Party of the United States. The History of the World Trade Union Movement. The History of African Americans in the United States. All good stuff. He outlined political history of the Americas. Those are all very good books. I would also recommend, I really enjoyed Mumia Abu-Jamal's book, We Want Freedom, A Life in the Black Panther Party. It's a history of the Black Panthers by Mumia with his own experiences mixed in with it. Fascinating book. What other history books? There's a lot of good history books out there. There was a communist British leader named Wall Hallington, I believe, and he wrote a book called Unemployed Struggles about the efforts of British communists to organize the unemployed during the 1930s depression. And that's an amazing book. He talks about, the amazing work that the communists of Britain did. So yeah, there are some great history books for you. Great history books there. There you go. All righty. Someone says 26 plus 6 equals 1, and that's a call for a united Ireland. I am all for a united Ireland, Irish reunification, right? The 6 counties are occupied, the Irish people, one united Ireland. I'm with you, Keaton. Jordan Peterson. Well, the funny thing about Jordan Peterson is, there's nothing wrong with telling people to clean their room or self-help advice. He should keep his mouth shut about politics and especially keep his mouth shut about communism. Thank you, Kinky. Much appreciated. Glad you like the recommendations. Jordan Peterson should keep his mouth shut about communism. He has read one book on communism. One book on communism, and it's called The Gulag Archipelago. The Gulag Archipelago. Domestic Policies of Bill Clinton. And it is an anti-communist rant, and he knows absolutely nothing about communism, and people listen to him, as if he knows what he's talking about. I have watched Jordan Peterson say such wildly inaccurate things about history. One thing he said many times, is Tsarist Russia was Tsarist Russia was a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks did to it. Tsarist Russia was a paradise. That's ridiculous. Tsarist Russia didn't have running water and electricity. It had 65% illiteracy for the population, right? Many of the people were peasants who were almost semi-slaves attached to the land. How on earth can he say, well, Tsarist Russia was a paradise, compared to what the Bolsheviks did to it? The Bolsheviks electrified the place. The Bolsheviks, built a modern industrial country. How can he say that with a straight face? Tsarist Russia was a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks did to it. Oh yeah, I'm Jordan Peterson. I mean, that is such an obviously false statement, right? But then another time I'm watching him, he's explaining Hitler, right? And he can't explain Hitler in terms of economics, crisis of capitalism. Oh no, and he says on there, I kid you not, Jordan Peterson says in one of his clips, he says, Hitler was elected by a huge majority. Never had a politician been elected by such a huge majority. Bullshit! Hitler was not elected by a huge majority. Hitler was elected by a minority. He was appointed chancellor. Never did the Nazi Party get a majority of the votes. Never, ever, ever, ever. And people think this guy is smart. Hitler was not elected by a majority. Tsarist Russia was not a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks did with it. Mexican drug cartels. So, how do people listen to this guy? Watch his debate with Slavoj Žižek, where he's reading the Communist Manifesto and clearly has no idea what it says. Mexican drug cartels, what it means. He's reading it and he's like interpreting statements to mean the opposite of what they mean. All right, USSR history books. So, yeah, Jordan Peterson, and again, I mean, the basic psychology stuff isn't bad. I mean, there's nothing wrong with some basic psychology. Tell people to clean their rooms, get their lives together. But he throws in all this anti-communism, and it's horrible. It's just awful. He throws in, and it's trying to tap into the resentment of young working class men who don't have a place in this society and are angry about it. But he's not inciting them against capitalism. He's inciting them against women, against the LGBT community. He's telling them to not have empathy for people. That's one thing that disturbed me. Jordan Peterson was such a big deal on the internet. I thought, I need to be fair to this guy. People often take little clips of me out of context and say I said things. So I made a decision. I said, I'm going to watch a Jordan Peterson lecture, the whole thing. I'm not going to just watch a clip here or there. I'm going to watch the whole darn thing. And so I watched a 60-minute Jordan Peterson lecture so that I would know what he said. The anti-communism was in there, the self-help psychology was in there. But what I thought was the most disturbing was there was endless references to people as worthless, people being worthless, people being failures, people being just miserable. And he has this like nice voice. He talks kind of like this. You see, and he doesn't have a mean voice. That's how he gets away with it. But there was just a whole large amount of dehumanization, right? With kids, they don't learn the proper motor skills. By the time they're 12, they're just worthless human beings, don't you know? I mean, it's like he's sitting there just dehumanizing people being worthless, people being, basket cases, people, I mean, just a huge amount. And instead of telling people to feel empathetic for people who are struggling, it was more of like, blame them for it. Understand that they just have this problem that has made them worthless. Trying to get people to not feel empathy. Not a big fan of his. Not a big fan of Jordan Peterson. Not a big fan. And I mean, the most ridiculous thing about Peterson that I've noticed is that, that like he can't tell the difference between postmodernism and Marxism. Postmodernism says there is no truth. Marxism says there is truth, right? Marxism is founded on the concept of objective reality. The entire premise of postmodernism is that there is no objective reality. Postmodernism and Marxism are opposites. So there you go. Most misunderstood aspect of Marxism, Chaya asks. The most misunderstood aspect of Marxism is that people think that Marxists oppose wealth. Marxists do not oppose wealth. They oppose a system that creates wealth through exploitation. That is what they oppose. Marxists do not oppose wealth. The goal of Marxism is to build a stateless, classless world of vast material abundance. And that, I have endless, every day I get someone who tweets at me, oh, you support Jeff Bezos. I'm like, no, I support the mission of the proletariat. It's an important concept, right? The problem with capitalism isn't that it creates growth. The problem with capitalism is that it holds back growth with irrationality. And no, our goal is not to make everyone poor. Our goal is to eradicate poverty by rationally planning the economy so that growth is unlimited. There is no limit to growth, but there is a limit to the capitalist system. And Marxism is not anti-wealth, it is not anti-progress, it is not anti-growth. Marxists do not support poverty. They do not glorify poverty. You don't know how many times I was out selling a newspaper and someone would point to my shoes and say, oh, those are nice shoes if you're a socialist. And first of all, they weren't very nice shoes. I mean, I've never been an expensive shoe-wearing guy. But I always wondered, like, how poor do you have to be? But this is what people believe, right? Socialists believe in poverty, right? I mean, it's really, really unbelievable. I mean, it's people think socialism is against wealth or growth, and it is against neither of those things. It's against exploitation. So there you go. All right. Neoliberalism as a strategy. Neoliberalism is an economic theory. It's not a strategy for dealing with countries. It's an economic theory. It's privatizations, it's cutbacks, it's looting of the state sector. But in strategy for dealing with Russia and China and Iran, well, I'm sure they would like to destroy these countries and loot them economically for sure. There you go. Lin Biao. Lin Biao was a general in the People's Liberation Army of China. He was a close associate of Mao Zedong, and he was the founder of the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution in China Mao basically feels like the Communist Party is moving away from him, so he mobilizes the youth of China to rise up and overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. Lin Biao is really the guy who did it, who started the Cultural Revolution. But Lin Biao also mysteriously disappeared. Lin Biao was accused of trying to kill Mao. There was this whole incident, and no one really knows what exactly happened. There was he was trying to flee to the Soviet Union, and his plane crashed or something like that. And after the fall of Lin Biao, the Gang of Four took over. There's two stages of the Cultural Revolution. First stage of the Cultural Revolution is, when Mao calls on the young people of China to bombard the headquarters, overthrow the Communist Party, and they form Red Guard youth clubs. That's when Lin Biao is in power. He's leading the first stage of the Cultural Revolution, which leads up to what's called the January Storm. And in January Storm, that's in the city of Shanghai. The Red Guard youth and the factory labor unions overthrow the Chinese Communist Party and kick it out of Shanghai. And they declare Shanghai is a commune. It's the Shanghai Commune. It's no longer part of China's state centrally planned economy. It is a commune. And Mao says, we can't do this. This is too much chaos. We can't do this. Lin Biao says he likes it. Mao says, Lin Biao, you are wrong. This is chaos. And Mao says, we're not going to do the commune thing. We're not going to, have break apart China and have every city be an independent cooperative. We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to have the 3-in-1 combination. Right? Every factory will have an elected representative of the workers, will have a political leader from the Communist Party, and it will have a technician. And there will be a 3-in-1 combination that will lead every factory. No more Shanghai Commune. Then, we don't know exactly what happened. Lin Biao, what happened? We don't know. I mean, there's a plane crash in the Soviet Union. They said, Lin Biao tried to kill Mao and then flew away, but no one really knows because they didn't even tell anybody until a year later. Very mysterious. When they announced that, Lin Biao is the guy who put together the Little Red Book, right? Mao's Little Red Book was, assembled. The quotes were assembled by Lin Biao. Lin Biao wrote the introduction to the Little Red Book. Well, after Lin Biao plane crash, Lin Biao was canceled. And so all this little school kids in China got their scissors and cut out, snip, 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 and they cut out any Little Red Book they could find. If there were two pages at the front that were Lin Biao's introduction, and they got their scissors and went around the country, and everyone cut out all the introductions of Lin Biao from the opening of the Little Red Book. I used to have an actual Chinese Little Red Book with 2 little pages that had been cut out at the beginning. It was so awesome. I had a Little Red Book. The ones in Chinese are much smaller than the ones in English, right, because of the Chinese characters. And I thought it was so neat because they were like two like the stubs of 2 pages of the Lin Biao introduction. They'd snipped. They'd snip them out, right? Because Lin Biao, after he did whatever happened, he was canceled, and they canceled him. I was in the Workers' World Party for many years, and the Workers' World Party liked Lin Biao. Right? They took the position that Lin Biao was good, and I don't agree with them. I think the Cultural Revolution was an absolute disaster. I have met many people who lived through the Cultural Revolution. I've even met some people who think like the Cultural Revolution was awful, but it was necessary. But the Cultural Revolution was still a nightmare. And Deng Xiaoping coming to power and arresting the Gang of Four was a good thing. And the Workers' World Party did not understand that. So I am not a fan of Lin Biao any longer. And that his Long Live the Victory of People's War, which is this manifesto he wrote. It seems very, very revolutionary, right? The idea that you can apply Mao's military strategies in China on a global scale. The book basically says, Mao, he would build up his forces in the countryside, surround the cities, and then take the cities. And that applied on a global scale. The third world was the countryside, and the communists would take over the third world first, and then they'd take over the first world. Well, that sounds great. That sounds really nice. That sounds romantic and revolutionary, but it's also, kind of delusional. That's not how things have worked, right? There's capitalism and socialism in the third world, and no, I'm not a big fan of Lin Biao. Not a big fan of Lin Biao anymore. I was at one point. At one point, when I was a young, early 20s member of the Workers' World Party, I was all about Lin Biao, but there you go. Alrighty. No longer my position. I think Lin Biao, the Gang of Four, Chen Bodai, not good. Not good. The Cultural Revolution was not good. The Cultural Revolution was bad. Very, very bad. Okie dokie. Finance capitalism. Is it the natural development of industrial capitalism? Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, finance capitalism naturally, industrial capitalism is the first stage, and as capitalism moves into the stage of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, you get the rise of finance capital and banking taking hegemony over industrial capital. That is correct. You are correct, sir. Deindustrializing agriculture under socialism. Well, I mean, I would think we would want to have agriculture and socialism be as efficient as possible. We'd want to have our farmers to have the best tractors, maybe use satellites in their farming to be more efficient. We would want to, protect the small farmer and the independent farmer. We would obviously want to nationalize the huge agribusiness firms, but, we'd want to protect the small farmer and subsidize the small farmer. But at the same time, we wouldn't be in favor of, we'd want that small farmer to have the best tools possible at his disposal, to produce as much food as possible, right? One of the ways the United States dominates the world is with corn. There's actually a documentary called King Corn you can watch, and it talks about this. Why is fructose corn syrup in everything in the United States? Well, it's because corn is a big part of the U.S. economy. And if you look at it, a lot of the world, a lot of the way developing countries have been ground into poverty is the USA, through corn subsidies, has been able to undercut their markets. Mexico used to grow its own food. Now Mexico gets all its food imported from the United States. Haiti used to grow its own food. Now Haiti gets all of its food imported from the United States. How did this happen? Well, the U.S. government subsidized corn and other American agricultural products. And by doing that, they were able to sell them at a cheaper rate than the local Haitian farmers, local Mexican farmers. So they went out of business. And now in Mexico and in Haiti, they have to import all their food from the United States. And a lot of farmers in Haiti and Mexico are poor working class people now, struggling to survive. And so obviously we would want to nationalize and break apart the American agribusiness monopolies while protecting the small farmers. Alrighty. Small and local solutions to capitalism, decentralization. Well, it's interesting. One of the right-wing or fascistic, anti-capitalist theories is called distributism. And it's like this idea that we can have government control of the economy on a local scale. And I don't see that, right? I think socialism, the efficiency of socialism is, look, if you look at Walmart, right? Walmart is very, very efficient, right? It's a huge corporation with central planning. They've got computers and everything to make sure that every store has exactly what it needs. Imagine if all the efficiency and centralization of Walmart and Amazon was not being used to make profits for the Walton family or for Jeff Bezos, but that efficiency was set in place in order to benefit the American people. Right? Imagine that we had on a national scale that level of coordination and efficiency to get shit done, to take care of people. That is socialism. So I don't think we would want to have socialism broken up so every little community out. Imagine that level of coordination and central planning were carried out in service of the people, not the profits of big corporations. Alrighty. Amazon union vote is coming up. Why don't small business owners support that? Small business owners can be the most anti-union, but at the end of the day, if Amazon is unionized, that would benefit small business owners. Why? Because Amazon is their competitor and it would cut into some of their profits, number one. Number two, if Amazon workers have more money, then they will spend them in their communities and small businesses will benefit. These small business owners should be big, big supporters. I haven't watched that interview, Joseph. Haven't had a chance to watch it. Small business owners should be big supporters of the union drive at Amazon, right? I mean, think about it. Amazon is an ultra monopoly that is basically getting a government subsidy and government protection. And, if anything, if these small business owners were smart, they would be supporters of the union drive. Unfortunately, though, a lot of small business owners have ultra right-wing ideas, libertarian ideas. So there you go. There you go. Six Nations and the Iroquois. I bet you didn't know that the Iroquois League was actually a big inspiration for the U.S. Constitution. And this is something that they don't give Native Americans credit for, but actually the Founding Fathers, it has been proven that the Founding Fathers of the United States, they actually studied the Iroquois League and how the Native American tribes organized their representative bodies, the U.S. Congress. the way it is set up was partially inspired by Native Americans. No one ever talks about this, right? It's worth looking into. The Iroquois League, the Six Nations, that was a huge inspiration for the U.S. Congress. That's fascinating history that has been covered up. But isn't it fascinating? They certainly didn't teach me that in school. I don't know what the diamond pipeline is. Sounds like it's not good. Sounds like it's not good. All right. Does a communist society just come into being? Or, yes, I mean, the idea is that as socialism develops, as prosperity and abundance are created, the need for the state gradually withers away, and society begins to operate on a more and more voluntary basis, right? Socialism Socialism just means the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power function, for the benefit of society, not simply on the basis of profit. Socialism is the abolition of profits and command. It is a centrally planned economy. It is popular power controlling the means of production. Communism is the ultimate fulfillment of that. It is when socialism is allowed to fully take its course and just unleash human development so high that gradually, over the course of thousands of years, you gradually start to see a society with no coercion, no state, each according to his own ability, each according to his needs. Um, and I almost argue that communism is a lot like a circle, right? There is no such thing as a circle, but you can get closer to a circle or you can get further away from a circle, right? But there is no perfect circle. A perfect circle is an impossibility. There will always be some edge, right? But you can get closer and closer and closer and closer to a perfect circle, but you can never actually get a perfect circle. And I argue that in some ways, communism, we will get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. It's like pi, right? Pi, right? 3.14159. You can keep calculating pi forever. It never ends, right? We may never get to, there's not going to be a moment where we sit there and go, we're in total communism right now. But gradually, coercion will fade away, scarcity will fade away, centralization will fade away, world will become more voluntary, more and more voluntary, abundance will exist, and gradually, coercion, inequality, these things gradually just kind of get smaller, right? As abundance increases, right? And as we get to a more and more high-tech world, people are less and less coerced. There is, more and more, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea. Communism is not something you can measure, right? Socialism, you can pretty well tell. You can tell what's socialist and capitalist. Communism is something far beyond any of us can imagine. It is the ideal. And it is an ideal that it may be like the horizon, they talk about the communist horizon. So, Hugo Chavez, I believe, used that phrase. So there you go. Okay, libertarian growth versus socialist growth. Well, libertarians, they tend to be all about the small business owner. They tend to say, get the government out of our backs so we can make lots of profits, deregulate everything. Socialist growth, on the other hand, is about coordinating all of society and centrally planning in order to create growth. So, libertarians and socialists both believe in growth, but they just have different ideas about how to do it. Libertarians want total deregulation to create growth. Socialists want a state centrally planned economy, eliminating the anarchy of production and the irrationality of the market to create growth. All right, World Socialist website and AOC. I saw their article. What AOC said in her Democratic Left interview was reprehensible. I mean, that was an awful interview, and I agree with what they said about it. I mean, I don't generally agree with a lot of what World Socialist website says. They are Trotskyites, but I think they're right in criticizing AOC for what she said, because that was an awful interview. All right. Okay, the spiritual side of the Dalai Lama. I mean, I don't know, the Dalai Lama, like the art of happiness and meditation and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. I've listened to some of what he says. It's very hollow and stuff. I mean, the Dalai Lama is a Tibet separatist, big ties to the CIA. And, he's been mass marketed to leftists in order to get leftists to hate China. And, I'm sure he's fun to listen to, but, I don't know. It just seems very shallow. The art of happiness, meditate, don't be greedy. There you go. Right, and that's a criticism of Buddhism, right? Again, every religion, right? Right. I take inspiration from Christianity, but I know that over the years there have been a lot of distortions of Christianity to serve feudalism and to serve capitalism, right? I know that. And just like Christianity, there are people I know who are Buddhists and are inspired by Buddhism to become communists, but for thousands of years in Tibet, Buddhism was used, just like Christianity was used, to promote feudalism. And one of the ways they did that reincarnation, right? Now, reincarnation seems like a good thing, right? It's like the idea is that if you live a good life, you'll be reincarnated into a better life. That sounds nice, right? What could be wrong with that? But the way it was used in Tibet under the Dalai Lama was not to say, oh, be good in this life and you'll be better in the next life. It was to say, oh, you're poor in this life? That's because of the fact that you did something bad in your past life. So you deserve to be poor. No, we're not going to try to make your life better. We're not going to redistribute things, but be humble, be obedient, and suffer through the hardship of this life. And then if you're good and you accept all the hardship that we, the feudal aristocracy, dump on you, then maybe in the next life you'll get a better place. That was the way Buddhism was used. Now, obviously, I know a lot of Buddhists who would say that's a complete distortion of their faith. And when I hear such sentiments from Christians, I say that's a distortion of my faith. So I'm not saying this is what Buddhism actually says. I'm saying that this is how the Tibetan feudal regime utilized the concept of reincarnation. One concept in Buddhism is you're supposed to not be attached to material things. You're supposed to detach from this world, right? Now, again, right, I know many people who are Buddhists, who that is their way of, mindfulness training, getting through the world, and I respect that. The way the feudal regime in Tibet utilized that was to say, oh, you're starving. Instead of, trying to get into a better situation, this is just the universe testing you. And this is good for you. It's good for you to be poor and starving because this is helping you become closer to God and be more spiritual. And I'm just telling you, right, that feudalism is bad, right? Capitalism is bad, right? And that in feudal societies, religions are taken and distorted in order to serve the feudal order. In capitalist societies, religions are taken and distorted in order to serve capitalism. Well, Buddhism, like Christianity, like Islam, like Judaism, like Shintoism, like Taoism, that the ruling class of any society distorts the religion in order to get it to serve their order. And the way Buddhism was interpreted in Tibet by the Dalai Lama's regime was to serve feudalism. But I know many Buddhists that are left-wing, revolutionary, progressive people that don't see it that way at all. And I respect that. But, just because the Tibetan regime called themselves Buddhists, Tibet was a nightmare, right? The Dalai Lama's regime in Tibet was an utter nightmare. Go and read Anna Louise Strong, a beautiful book, When the Serfs Stood Up in Tibet. Go read what W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most respected African-American scholars, said about Tibet and how it was and how the Chinese people helped slaves to rise up against their masters in Tibet. The Tibetan feudal regime was absolutely awful. And not only did, was it China that liberated it, but then after Tibet started having land redistribution and all of that, the United States airdropped Tibet separatists into Tibet to burn healthcare clinics. The Dalai Lama's brother was among them, to burn healthcare clinics, to murder literacy volunteers. And the Tibet Civil War of the 1950s involved the United States trying to, foment civil war and unrest and murder people all across Tibet. It was awful. So Tibetan Buddhism, I'm not a big fan of. Buddhism is a religion that I can respect. Like every religion, it can be distorted. But the Tibet stuff, the Dalai Lama, not a big fan. Not a big fan. The Dalai Lama presided over a slave society where people were brutally oppressed. I know it's not what you saw in that Hollywood movie with Richard Gere, and that's not what you're supposed to believe, but I'm telling you what's true, not what you're supposed to believe. Is there a leader that millions of Americans would die for? Trump. And that's not good. I don't want them to go out and, I mean, look what happened on Capitol Hill on January 6th. That was a nightmare. But do you think there's any other president in U.S. history who'd be able to pull something like that off? No. I mean, let's be real. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. It's not what you wanted to hear. Is there any American leader millions of Americans would die for? Yes, Donald Trump. That's probably the only one. And that's a nightmare. So we've got our work to do. We need to build a socialist movement. Yeah, the only leader that I can think of in the United States at this time that millions of Americans would die for is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was an awful president. And he took advantage of that. He realized that he had a lot of people who would die for him. And so he sent them to the Capitol. And he sat back and laughed and threw them under the bus. And he didn't pardon them. And yeah, and he sent a lot of working class people who'd seen their neighborhoods destroyed, were angry, who he had manipulated with his crazy QAnon conspiracy theories and anti-communism. And he said, I'll meet you at the Capitol. And they went to the Capitol, and he didn't show up. And he sat back and watched CNN and laughed there. And, look at the buffalo, and laughed. And he could have pardoned them before he left office, and he didn't do that. And Donald Trump is an awful leader. The way he threw his supporters under the bus. It is unbelievable. He humiliated his supporters. He made fools out of them. He used them to, enact chaos and destruction and act like fools and hooligans on Capitol Hill to make a mockery. I mean, it was despicable what Donald Trump did on January 6th. Absolutely despicable. But yes, Donald Trump took advantage of the fact that people would die for him, and I believe they would. I believe they absolutely would. And that's a nightmare because there are many of Americans that are ready to fight. They're angry. They want something to believe in. And, if leftism is represented by the certain clowns that shall not be named, they're not going to get it from the left. We have a work to do, right? This culture of calling anyone, you're a Nazbol if you believe in anything. This is basically saying, if you want to fight and suffer, and if you want to fight and organize for justice, you better be on the right, because we on the left are just a bunch of cynical teenagers. We need to get out of that. We need to build a real left-wing movement. So, Paul Robeson, an amazing, just an all-around high-achieving individual. He was a football player, an award-winning athlete. He was an amazing singer. He sang on Broadway. He was a writer. He was a communist activist, an anti-imperialist, an anti-racist organizer. Paul Robeson was a dynamic human being in so many ways. He was a Renaissance man, you could say. He's from New Jersey, African-American man from New Jersey, Broadway star, award-winning athlete, and communist. All right. Libertarian failure in Chile. Yeah, I do not for the life of me know how libertarians have convinced themselves that what happened in Chile was an economic miracle. The 73 Pinochet regime comes in, Milton Friedman and Pinochet, they start deregulating and enacting libertarian policies in Alan Dershowitz, enacting libertarian policies in Chile, and it wrecked the place. Malnutrition, hunger in the streets. It was a nightmare, and the Chilean economy didn't start improving until the 80s, after the Pinochet regime started renationalizing things, after they abandoned the economic libertarian policies. So it's pretty unbelievable that that libertarians go around saying this. I have a great class you can watch online about neoliberalism. All right. How do you defend Venezuela when they say that Maduro murdered protesters? Well, I think it's the other way around. There are Venezuelan protesters who bombed schools, bombed buses. They strung wires across intersections to behead cops. During La Salida, which was the exit, which was this huge campaign to drive Maduro from office, during that campaign, the Venezuelan opposition killed roughly 75 people. There were 75 deaths, that took place in Venezuela. So Yeah. I think it's the Venezuelan opposition that you know, burns food warehouses because they want to create, shortages in the country. They're the ones that have been killing people. And the Venezuelan government has been trying to defend itself from an onslaught of terrorism and extremists. So there you go. Are drug dealers bourgeois? No, drug dealers are lumpen. They are lumpen elements, right? That's declassed elements, right? And the lumpen proletariat. Those are people that are, that are surviving via criminal means. That is the lumpen proletariat, right? Lumpen elements, people involved in the drug trade, they are lumpen, right? They are lumpen. The lumpen proletariat, which I have a whole video. What is the lumpen proletariat? Check it out. Drug dealers are part of the lumpen proletariat. Gavin Newsom recall. Look, there's a purge going on in the Democratic Party. The Silicon Valley, you know, managerial wing wants to uproot all the urban networks and machines. They don't like here in New York. They don't like that Cuomo, and they don't like that he comes out of this, this working class, he's got this Democratic Party machine here in New York City, very corrupt. They don't like that. They want to uproot it. They want a managerial solution for the city, right? And that's the same in California, right? I mean, California Democratic Party, a lot of entrenched power and interest. They want to uproot it. They want a managerial technocracy, right? And there is a technocratic wing of the Democratic Party that has the upper hand. And there is the old boys machines, the corrupt machines, the urban machines that are really the base of the Democratic Party. And I think this is the technocratic managerial Silicon Valley wing trying to push against the urban machines. That's what the fight I see going on. All right. Did socialism fail to spread after World War II due to nukes? Well, first of all, socialism did spread after World War II. After World War II, Eastern Europe became socialist. After World War II, China, the biggest country in the world in terms of population, became socialist. The northern half of the Korean Peninsula became socialist. So, yeah, I think socialism spread after World War II. There was a wave of anti-colonial resistance. In the Arab world, you had the birth of Ba'athist Arab socialism in the 1950s. And Arab socialism, Abdel Nasser, and you had the Cuban Revolution in 1959. Yeah, I think socialism did spread after World War II. I mean, maybe it didn't spread as much as people wanted it to, but post-World War II, we saw a vast expansion of socialism around the world. So there you go. But yeah, did the USA having a nuclear weapon? Certainly, yeah. I mean, the Greek Civil War, the Soviet Union probably didn't intervene as much as it could because the USA had the atomic bomb. In France, the communists were part of the government, and they were forced to step down from the French government, even though they won the elections. Well, that was very much a result of fear of the atomic bomb, So it was a factor, but I don't think it's accurate. Trotskyites will say that all the time. It's like, oh, Stalin held back the revolution. I mean, can you think of any socialist leader who presided over more of an expansion of socialism around the world than Stalin? Think about it. At the time Stalin died, right? You'd gone from the Soviet Union, one country being socialist. All of Eastern Europe had become socialist. China had become socialist. Yugoslavia had become socialist. North Korea had become... I mean, it's like... So how... I mean, where's this like... Stalin, he only believed in socialism in one country, but Trotsky was for the global revolution to expand socialism. Well, Stalin wasn't a nut job ultra-leftist trying to foment global civil war and unrest, but socialism vastly expanded under Stalin's leadership. So, yeah, all right. Socialist government, how would the police force and laws change? Well, there's a lot of laws. I'm not going to go over every law and how it would change. I don't even know that. I'm not a lawyer. But as far as the police force, there's a slogan that we hear people use. It's called abolish the police. I don't like that slogan. Why? Because what immediately comes to people's minds is they say, oh, okay, so it's like 3 a.m. and my home is being broken into. Who do I call if we abolish the police? And generally, when you're arguing about that with leftists, they'll say, oh, well, we'll have this workers' community militia patrol thing you can call. Well, then they're not saying abolish the police now, are they? They're saying set up a new police force. And yes, in a socialist society, we will have new policing institutions and new bodies to serve the overall socialist program. The police forces in the United States started and were originated in slave catcher groups, and they defend private property, and they tend to have a hostile attitude toward the communities they serve, etc. And yes, as we move towards socialism, we will have new policing institutions and new law enforcement agencies that are in line with our socialist values. Yes, that will happen. But if you say to people, abolish the police, you sound like a lunatic. Abolish the police is not a rational sounding slogan. How about, we need a government, a working people's government. We need a new kind of police that serve working people. We need to stop police brutality. We need, but when you say abolish the police, people don't know what you mean. So yes, obviously, right? If a government of action were to come to power in Washington, D.C., right? If a progressive, anti-war, socialistic government came into power in Washington, D.C., in order to stay in power, it would need to change the way the military worked and put, socialists in the military, start training U.S. military people in socialist ideology like they've done in Venezuela. There used to be peace officers. I didn't know that, old gringo. On top of that, you'd have to change the nature. I mean, the FBI would have to be dissolved because the FBI started out as an anti-communist organization. They get brainwashing, the FBI, they get pumped full of anti-communism in their training, and you'd have to dissolve the FBI. You probably have to create a new, federal, policing and intelligence agency to replace the FBI. You'd have to have some kind of new institution. You'd have to get rid of the FBI. You would have to change the nature of the U.S. state, right? This is what Lenin writes about in The State and Revolution, right? That ultimately you can't build socialism with a capitalist state. You have to break apart and restructure the state like they've done in Venezuela, like they've done in Cuba, right? I mean, it would have to be done because the state as it currently exists has been designed to serve capitalism and imperialism. So a new state, if we got power peacefully, we got elected, we would then have to begin the process of dismantling the old state and building new institutions, right? We'd change the nature of the police, change the nature of the military, change the nature of the intelligence agencies, right? It would all be necessary. All be necessary, right? The state, you cannot simply take hold of the state machinery, as Karl Marx famously said regarding the Paris Commune. All right. Means of production under Trotskyism. Trotskyism is a variant of socialist ideology. It's not an economic system. So, I mean, yeah, it's an ideology. It's, the permanent revolution, Soviet Union's a deformed workers' state, the transitional program, etc. So, the means of production under Trotskyism, I don't even know what you're getting at there. Silly question. That's okay. All right, domestic policies of Bill Clinton. Awful. He got rid of welfare as we know it. He created NAFTA. He sent the Department of Justice to go after Ron Carey, who was a leader of the Teamsters Union, who was fighting for working people and unionized UPS. He sent the Justice Department after him. What else did Bill Clinton do? Mass incarceration, increasing prison terms, increasing, rolling back people's rights. Yeah, Bill Clinton was an awful president in many ways, right? The second term of Bill Clinton was worse, arguably. All right. Mexican drug cartels, awful, absolutely awful. Look, the U.S. government in the 80s, in order to fight the Nicaraguan socialist government, in order to fight against communists in El Salvador and Colombia and elsewhere, started working with drug cartels and narco gangs and sending them guns and weapons. And as a result, Central America, Mexico, South America has been devastated by these horrendous groups. That is a crime against humanity, right? That the U.S. government, in the name of fighting communism, armed drug dealers and narco gangs and extremists, and decades later, they are still a plague on that region, right? Just a plague on that region, right? How many people have died because of this U.S. government policy? Oh, we don't like communists. Okay, let's go find some drug dealers and gangs and give them high-tech weapons. And, Honduras, how many people have died? Highest murder rate in the Western world, from what I understand, right? Guatemala, how many people have died? El Salvador, how many people have died, right? Mexico, the executions, the drug it's unbelievable. This is U.S. foreign policy, right? Where's the black book of capitalism, adding up all the deaths from U.S. foreign policy of arming drug dealers, right? The U.S. government gives all kinds of guns and weapons to the government of Mexico, and a bunch of them end up in the hands of drug dealers, right? They somehow get from the hands of the Mexican police to the hands of the drug dealers. And do we then say, oh, we better not give them these weapons because they end up in the hands of the drug dealers? No. The same. Next year, we give them the exact, even higher numbers of weapons, right? For years, we've been doing this, right? Mexican government, oh, it's infiltrated, corrupt, all kinds of drug gangs there. Okay, we'll give them loads of stockpiles of weapons, right? All the drug gangs of Mexico are armed with U.S. military grade weapons. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? The drug cartel regimes. I mean, what they've done, the killing and all of that. That is a body count. You want to talk about a body count, right? Books on the history of the Soviet Union. Anna Louise Strong, one of my favorite writers, she wrote The Stalin Era about her time in the Soviet Union. She wrote, The First Time in History. She wrote The Soviets Expected It. Anna Louise Strong is an amazing writer. Huge fan of Anna Louise Strong. What else? Sydney and Beatrice Webb. They wrote 2 books called Soviet Communism, A New Civilization, 2 volumes. Amazing analysis of how the Soviet system worked. What else? The History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union short course, which is a history of Bolshevism, basically, published in 1936. Very good. You'll learn from the earliest Russian socialist movements right up until the 1930s and the 5-year plans. Very good. I learned a lot from that. Very clearly written. History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union short course. What else? Socialism Betrayed by Roger Kieran. That is a very important book. Gives an analysis of how the Gorbachev era, how it fell apart. Oh, Harpal Brar wrote a very good book on perestroika as well. I recommend that. Harpal Brar, his Economic History of the Soviet Union, Perestroika by Harpal Brar. I recommend that. Who else? Yeah, there's many writers that I would that on Soviet history I would recommend. But there you go. All right, Alan Dershowitz. Well, big supporter of Israel, probably the most famous lawyer in American history. Right, he's considered to be one of the most prominent legal voices. Some of the stuff he says, he talks about police perjury and how common it is in the United States. That's true, and it needs to be said. That's an important point. But yeah, overall, Alan Dershowitz, huge supporter of Israel. Norman Finkelstein exposed him. Just exposed the dishonesty of some of his writing in support of Israel. And as a result, I believe Norman Finkelstein lost his job as retaliation. That wasn't cool. But yeah, Alan Dershowitz, his debate with Noam Chomsky, he just gets very nasty. Alan Dershowitz, when he's debating, I've noticed this is his tactic, and it's so obvious what he's doing. I've watched so many debates with Norman Finkel. I'm sorry. Whoa, the lights went out. 1 second. 1 second. Oh, this almost looks better, doesn't it? All right. I've watched so many debates. This is what Alan Dershowitz, and then we'll end. Oh, did I knock the? What in the world is going on here? Okay. Oh, the thing came unplugged. Wow. What a night. What a night, folks. All right. I'm gonna answer this, and then I'm gonna end. But so this is what Alan Dershowitz will do when he's debating. He will. I've seen him do this over and over again. So the person is trying to make their points, right? And he will interrupt them constantly. And I'll say, well, first of all, and he just interrupts, he interrupts as you're making your points. Then it gets back to him and it's time to speak. And he said, wow, all he had on me the entire time was, well, yeah, of course that's all he had because you interrupted him so many times, right? It's classic. Oh, can you believe that? All he's got on, and it's like, it's so obvious the person has more, but he's interrupted the whole time. And it's like I'm watching this, and I've seen this so many times how he does it. It's like, it's so obvious. And so, it's like, yeah, I saw he did that to Noam Chomsky. He did that to Norman Finkelstein. And Norman Finkelstein and both of them have to say, I didn't interrupt you, now you don't interrupt me. And he just continues to interrupt. And then when it gets back to him, all they had the whole time, all they've got on me is this. And of course they have way more points, and it's so obvious what he's doing. And the other thing that he does is he accuses people of being anti-American, which is interesting. I think he knows that if he just said anti-Israel, that wouldn't work. So he says, well, you just hate America so much, and it's like he doesn't even back that up with anything. It's just like it's like a Rush Limbaugh appeal. Well, you just hate America so much. You hate America. It's like based on what, right? It's just, I'm not a big fan of Alan Dershowitz. I do appreciate his honesty. He is one of the most honest voices about the U.S. legal system and how corrupt it is. So I appreciate him talking about that. He talks about how trials are basically rigged against the defense and, about how police perjury is really common. That's all good. That's good information. To have somebody with his level of mainstream credibility talking about that is valuable. So that I'll give him credit for. And, the myth of the U.S. legal system, I mean, good night. I mean, what you see on cop shows is so ridiculous. The overwhelming majority of cases in the USA never go to trial. If someone goes to trial in the U.S. legal system, it is something's not right, right? Nobody goes to trial. Plea deals, right? Actual criminals get plea deals. People that are innocent make a plea deal and go to prison to avoid the trial penalty, the risk of going to trial. Nobody goes to trial. If somebody goes to trial, the chances are either they're innocent or they're rich, they're very, very rich, or they're facing such an extreme penalty that they fear, that they have no choice or whatever. But, like maybe if it's their third strike in California and they're going to get 25 years, they'll go to trial just to avoid 25 years. Very rich people, right? Jeffrey Epstein, he went to trial. Why? He's rich, right? But for the most part, if someone goes on trial in the United States, if they're willing to risk the trial penalty, if they're willing to go through like 2 years of waiting for their trial to happen and spending all that money on defense and living in fear and wondering if they're going to have to go to prison or, if somebody's going to do that, the chances are they're innocent. Okay? Right? I mean, if somebody goes to trial in the United States, they're probably innocent. And remember this, if you ever get on a jury, right? And I'm sure I don't know, I'm going to get flack for the same. Remember that. If you're ever on a jury in the United States, remember that. If somebody goes on trial in the United States, if someone actually takes the risk of going on trial, there is a very, very, very good chance they are innocent. Now, obviously, there's exceptions. If they're very wealthy, if it's their third strike, but nobody goes to trial in the United States. Okay? So keep in mind what I just said, right? That if someone goes on trial in the United States, they're probably innocent of the crime. The conviction rate in the United States is massive. Juries almost always convict people. The Bronx in New York City has one of the lowest conviction rates in the country. And you know what it is? 2/3. 2/3. Right? In the Bronx, which is the poorest county in the country, Bronx of New York City, 2/3 of people are convicted. Even though the chances are, if you go on trial, if you take the risk of going to a trial, you're probably innocent. 2/3 of people get convicted anyway, okay, in jury trials in the Bronx. 2 years, right? 2/3 are convicted, right? And that's considered the lowest, that is the lowest conviction rate in the country. So yeah, right? If 2/3, in the Bronx get convicted, I mean, don't anyone tell what you see on police shows, on CSI, and what you see on CSI and Law and Order, that's a bunch of malarkey, right? If you watch those shows, you'd think every criminal goes to trial. That doesn't happen. You think criminals walk on technicalities all the time. That doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. It's generally the opposite, right? Is that, they talk about there are cases where it's politically loaded. Like they talk about the Mumia exception, right? Mumia Abu Jamal, former Black Panther, and they talked about like all kinds of law got thrown out the window in Mumia's case. Why? Because he was political. He was a Black Panther accused of killing a police officer. And like even according to the prosecution, even according to Pennsylvania's own laws, he couldn't be on death row because in Pennsylvania, to get the death penalty, you have to have been it has to have been a premeditated murder, right? First degree murder to get the death penalty in Pennsylvania. It has to be premeditated. You have to go and planned it. And according to the prosecution and their narrative of events, it was like a 2-second decision to shoot the police officer. So even if every word the prosecutor said in the Mumia trial was correct, Mumia should not have gotten a death sentence. But he did. Why? Because he was a Black Panther and he was accused of killing a police officer. It didn't matter, right? Now, I don't think Mumia is guilty. I think Mumia Abu Jamal was innocent. But even if every single word the prosecution said, it was second-degree murder. It wasn't first-degree murder. But it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's how this stuff works. There's many cases like this, right? The Rosenbergs, very famous, the Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They got the death penalty, right? Well, in the USA, you can get the death penalty for espionage. That's true. Except they weren't convicted of espionage. They were convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage. They never proved they actually gave anything to the Soviets. They proved that they had a meeting to talk about it. Well, under U.S. law, you don't get the death penalty for conspiring to commit espionage. You get the death penalty for espionage. But gavel, overruled. Why? Because it was political, because they wanted to execute somebody, because they were mad that the Soviet Union had the atomic bomb. So, no, it's not that people get off on technicalities all the time. It's the opposite. It's that law gets thrown out the window because, look, I'll just say this, right? And this is an awful way to end the live because it's a topic that gets me upset. But the death penalty, right? Personally, if it was up to me, no country in the world would have the death penalty, right? That's not realistic, but I don't like the death penalty. But I must say that China, Iran, Cuba, countries like that are fighting for their lives, they have the death penalty for this reason, right? That, in countries where there's a lot of drug gangs and terrorists that are operating in the country, the way drug gangs and terrorists generally operate is they walk up to people and they point a gun at their head and they say, work with us or die. Well, the Chinese government, the Iranian government, the Cuban government, they have to have a way to get people to not work with them, right? So they have to have the same level of force. You work with them, you die, right? I mean, it's like an arms race, right? The drug cartels are pointing guns at people and saying, work with us or die. Well, they have to be able to say, oh, if I work with them, I still might die, right? If people's choice is, okay, I've got a gun pointed at my head. Now, do I work with them and get life in prison, or do I say no and they shoot me? Well, the state then has to have the ability to say that. And the same for terrorist groups, right? In Iran, you have these, Sunni separatists that operate, on the border that are trying to break away sections of Iran that are Sunni, and they work with Wahhabi terrorists, and they murder people, and they kill people, and they cut, again, these Sunni separatists, these, Al-Qaeda groups that are operating inside, coming over the Afghan border into Iran, they approach people, they point a gun at them, work with us or die. Well, in order for the Iranian government to fight back against them, they have to be able to say, if you work with them, you will die. I mean, and it's a military situation. A lot of these countries that are developing countries that have the death penalty, it is a military kind of thing. It's like these groups are threatening people and killing them. So we have to, as the state, to fight against these groups that are threatening people and killing them, we have to have that ability. It's an ugly situation. It's awful. It's horrible, right? It's awful, but that tends to be the situation. Now, and it works, right? It tends to work, right? If Singapore, you bring drugs into Singapore, they kill you. Well, people don't bring drugs into Singapore. Why? They kill you, right? It works. Now, I mean, it's awful, it's evil, but it works, right? You bring drugs into Singapore, they kill you. People think, oh, I'm not going to bring drugs into Singapore because they kill me. I mean, at least it works. The way we do the death penalty in the United States is the most insane, stupid thing I have ever seen. So, in the United States, most U.S. states don't have the death penalty, right? Texas, Ohio, most states don't even have the death penalty, okay? But in the states that do have the death penalty, in order to get the death penalty in the United States, you have to have either killed a police officer or committed a murder that is so grotesque and brutal that you get the death penalty. Most murderers in the United States don't get the death penalty, right? Right? So no, in a situation where a police officer gets killed, where there's a robbery and the police show up, it's an armed robbery and they're having a shootout, no armed robber is sitting there going, oh boy, I better not shoot the police because if I do that, 20 years from now, I'll get They're not doing that. They're not thinking about that, right? Do you think axe murderers like Ted Bundy and people like that chop up 20 people and, eat their brains or something like that? Do you think they're going, oh, gee, I better not do that because if I do that 25 years from now, they're not going to do that. The way we have the death penalty in the United States, it's not a deterrent, and they've shown that. The states that have the death penalty in the United States tend to have higher crime rates. Murderers in the United States are not afraid of murdering people because 25 years from now, they get lethal injection. It just doesn't happen, right? So, it's not a deterrent. It does not serve a deterrent purpose, right? In these countries that have the death penalty, these developing countries that are kind of fighting for their lives against terrorists and drug cartels, having the death penalty makes a lot of sense, as awful as it is. But the way we do it here, it doesn't make any sense. right? The reason we have the death penalty here in the United States is for two reasons. It's number one, it is a political statement, right? It's the government of the United States telling police officers, we like you, right? It's basically saying to police, look, if someone kills one of you, we'll kill the person. So that shows how special you are. And it's basically a gesture to the policing agencies. Well, look, I sympathize with police officers. I don't, I mean, I obviously don't support police brutality and stuff, but look, I mean, being the family member of a cop and, worrying if your husband's going to come home, I understand, the fears that people in that, I mean, somebody's got to do that job and okay, right? But at the same time, should we have a whole practice of executing people just to like make a political statement to people who do one job? No. You know what I mean? No. And so the idea that we should have the death penalty just to make cops feel good. No, not for it. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. It doesn't deter crime, doesn't make cops safer, right? It might make cops feel good if someone who's killed a cop gets the death penalty. That's not enough of a reason. You don't have government policies to make people feel good. So that's the first reason we have the death penalty in the United States. It makes cops feel good to know that if somebody kills one of them, they die. That's not, you don't have policies to make cops feel good, right? I mean, I'm all for respect and I'm all for, empathizing with police officers and their families and the stress they go. No, we shouldn't be executing people to make cops feel good. So that's not a valid reason. Number two, and this is the one that gets me, is that the death penalty in the United States is like this sick ritual. Okay? Right? In a lot of countries, when they have the death penalty, they just shoot you. Right? I think, I mean, I don't want to speak to specific countries. I don't want to misrepresent them. But in a lot of countries, they have the death penalty. It's like, you're convicted of this crime. They come, they take you out of your cell. Kaboom, you're dead. End of story. No, we don't do it that way here in the United States. Oh, no. It's this, you get your last meal, and then they have witnesses, and then it's like the victim's family sits over here, and the family of the person being executed sits over here, and there's like a religious leader who reads from the Bible, and and there's it's like this demonic performative ritual. Right? It's this long, elaborate, and they often they'll wait until the stroke of midnight, and it's the most demented. It is some kind of weird religious ceremony that we do in the United States, right? And it's sick. It's sick, right? I mean, look, if you're going to have the death penalty, I personally am against the death penalty, okay? I just don't, I think, as a fully developed Western country, we ought to just not have it like every other fully developed Western country. But, if we're going to have it, just shoot them. Right? I mean, if we're going to have it, when the time comes, when their appeals are up, shoot them. End of story. But oh, no. It's this like elaborate ceremony. And you talk about the Bible and a life for a life, right? And, an eye for an eye. And, at the stroke of midnight, justice will be had. And the minister shall read from the scripture. And their family, the family of the victim, of the victim will be sitting there going, revenge. And the family of the person, who's dying will be sitting there. Their mother is crying. This is sick. It's sick. It's not a healthy ritual. Not a healthy ritual at all. So, basically the only reason we have the death penalty in the United States, it doesn't deter crime because we don't do it in a way that deters crime, right? If we could do it that way, right? I mean, if we wanted to really have the death penalty in the United States, and it's like, oh, you bring drugs to the United States, we kill you. I don't think that's a good idea, but if we did that, that would work. But we don't do it that way. You have to commit a very grisly murder or kill a police officer. And then you get it 25 years from now. So that does not deter anybody. There is no murderer who goes, oh boy, I better not do this. I'm going to get killed 25. They don't do that. So it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work as a deterrent. The only reason we do it, as I said, is as to make cops feel good, as like a symbolic gesture to say, hey cops, if someone kills one of you, we'll kill them, right? And number two is because it's this ritual. It's this like religious ceremony. Well, we shouldn't be killing people for religious ceremonies, and we shouldn't be killing people to make, to make a political statement to one particular job. So we shouldn't have the death penalty in the United States. Now, that's long and complicated, what I just said there. And I explained why countries in the developing world have the death penalty and why, as much as I'm, grossed out, and I don't think it's, a necessarily good thing. I understand when they're like fighting for their lives every day against drug cartels and against those groups, why they feel that they need to have the death penalty, which I explained. It's a complicated thing. I have strong feelings about the death penalty, but it must be said. It must be said, right? That again, nothing exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in a vacuum, right? Nothing exists in a vacuum, right? And the death penalty is one of those things, right? I would like a world where there was no death penalty anywhere in the world. That's what I would like, right? And I think we in the United States were developed enough as a society, we should just get rid of it. But I understand there are countries that are not facing the same circumstances that we're in. I wish those countries could just get rid of the death penalty, but it's not realistic, right? Telling Iran to get rid of the death penalty, I mean, that would be nice. I would think it would be better to have no death penalty anywhere in the world. But I'm sorry, I'm not. I mean, look at the circumstances. Telling China to get rid of the death penalty, look at the circumstances they're in. Not realistic. Might be good, but it's not realistic, right? And that's basically that's how I see it. So how do we get on that? I don't know. Does anyone have anything else before we end this stream? It's late, but you guys are great, and if you don't agree with me, that's fine, right? And I respect people's right to disagree. The death penalty is one of those issues that people just don't see eye to eye on, right? And that's okay, right? We can disagree. We can always disagree. We can always disagree. So yeah, anything else on people's minds? I'm seeing people in the chat. What else is on people's minds? Anything else, folks? Anything else, right? If you haven't had a chance, be sure to pick up a copy of We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. Good stuff on here. You can use it for political education. All right, folks, I think we're going to cut it off here. So it's been fun. I'm glad I jumped on tonight to have a good conversation. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night.